Good evening and welcome to the April 6, 2020 Grafton Tri-Committee meeting. Pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the Open Meeting Law, GLC 30A 18, and the Governor's March 15, 2020 order imposing strict limitations on the number of people that may gather in one place, this meeting of the Grafton Tri-Committee is being conducted via remote participation. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings as provided for in the order. We are recording this and we will rebroadcast this in our regular channels. And a reminder that any persons who would like to listen to this meeting while in progress should be able to do so by visiting the Zoom link in many places, but I know it's on the Grafton Public School website. So we will need to take attendance and we'll need to announce all the committee members and school and town officials on the call. We'll need to take a roll call for votes. That only pertains to the select board because they're the only ones that really can vote in this format. As host, I'll act as a moderator. I'll invite each member to comment or ask questions about each matter on the agenda, giving you each a turn, and then at the end, follow any follow-up questions. If you don't have any comments, you can just let me know when I call your name. For our attending community members, I have you, for all our attending committees, if you can mute yourself, and I'll ask that you remain muted until called on. The hand raising feature, it's not available in this webinar feature, but I ask that you can physically raise your hand and I'll call on you. If you don't have video, you can send me a chat, but I would appreciate it if you could try every effort to have a video going. And I'll make sure we have plenty of time for questions and plenty of time to speak. One of my best practices that we use in our work settings is if you're about to speak, just wait, count 1, 2, 3 to make sure you're not talking over anybody. And if that does happen, I will need to kind of step in and just make sure everybody can be heard. And before we officially start, I wanted to take a moment to wish everyone in our community well. This is a trying time, and I've been so impressed with the way Grafton has come together. And I'd also like to add that on a good day, managing a meeting of this size is difficult, so I ask for everybody's patience and flexibility. So the purpose of this meeting is to have a committee check-in regarding the 21 budget and the override. Since we last met just a month ago, there's obviously been some global changes that are affecting our town. Jay will provide an update from the schools, Tim will provide a town side update, and then Matt will offer a finance committee update. So we'll start with roll call. I'll start on the school committee end. Laura Often, chair, here. Jen Conley.
Jen Connolly here.
Amy Marr.
Amy Marr here.
Heather Riley.
Heather Riley here.
Melissa Maison. I don't see Melissa yet. We have our superintendent, Jay Cummings.
Jay Cummings here.
And we have our director of finance, Dan Gale.
Dan Gale here.
Excellent. I'll pass it over to Jen Thomas and
Oh, sorry, didn't mean to talk over you. Jen Thomas here. Let's see, everybody's mixed in here. Peter Carlson.
Peter Carlson is here.
Doreen DeFazio.
Doreen DeFazio here.
Ed Prisby.
Here.
Donna Stock.
Donna Stock here.
Tim McInerney.
Tim McInerney here.
Rebecca Meekins.
Rebecca Meekins here.
Okay.
Great, thank you, Jen. And finally, Matt Often, if you can do a finance committee roll call and your staff as well.
Matthew Often here. Sufiaco. You're on mute too. You're still on mute.
Here.
Dan Kusher.
Here.
Barry Smith.
Barry Smith here.
Sue Robbins.
Sue Robbins here.
Colleen Roy.
Colleen Roy here.
Irene Hooley.
Irene Hool here.
Sorry about that. Heather McHugh.
Heather McHugh here.
Let's see, who else do we have? Eric Swenson.
Eric Swenson here.
That's us.
All right, excellent. Thank you all for joining. I'm going to turn it over to Jay Cummings. He's going to kick off the meeting with an update from the school side.
Hi, everybody. On the school side, it's fairly straightforward. In a general sense, nothing's changed in terms of the FY21 through FY25 projections of school needs. Obviously, with everything going on, we do anticipate being probably to the good in FY20 and potentially having increased costs that are yet to be defined in FY21. So big picture, unchanged.
All right, short and sweet. Thank you. And now I'm going to turn it over to Tim and Becca.
One, two,
Wait,
and can you hear me?
I'm sorry,
Oh, I'm sorry.
just a quick question from Jay. So the projections are exactly, there are no changes to your recommendation or ask from last time?
Correct.
Okay, I will ask Tim and Becca to go over their presentation.
Okay, good evening. Everybody can hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, I had some technical difficulty last night. I'm going to make sure that doesn't happen. So first, I just want to report that as of today, there are no COVID-19 reported cases, which I know this isn't a COVID call, but it's important to note for the community that today we had no reported cases, which is great news. So I wanted to share that to start us off. Late last week, we started to think about fiscal 20 and where we might end this fiscal year. I can tell you without hesitation that our revenues are exceeding our expenses at this point. Our state aid is coming in as projected. All of our local receipts are coming in as projected. So for 20, which will close out June 30, we're going to be fine in terms of getting through this fiscal year without any revenue reductions. We don't have a lot of expenses on the town side. Anything related to COVID-19 that we can get reimbursed for either under MEMA or FEMA, we're keeping track of those costs. We don't have a lot as of yet in terms of overtime or need, but as those go and as we track them, there may be a possibility to collect those. For day-to-day purchases for fiscal 20, we didn't do a spending freeze because we just don't have a lot of money. We have everyone working remotely for the most part, maybe 3 or 4 people come into this building. So I don't have a lot of cost savings either, but I don't have any major purchases to be had during the last quarter of the fiscal. But all staff know that if they are considering a purchase that's significant, they ought to talk to me and Becca first so we can make a decision about how to move forward just to make sure we have cash flow on hand to meet those expenses. And obviously keeping in concert with the appropriation from town meeting is paramount. So that's 20. When we looked at 21, we said, well, what's going to happen relative to our 20 categories of revenue, give or take? So one of the items we had was motor vehicle excise tax. And I'll put up well, Becca, I'm going to ask you to share a screen in a second, but I'm just going to talk for another couple of seconds about categories of revenue that we looked at for 21. We had anticipated some increases when we created the budget pre-COVID-19. So we had to adjust our revenues, or at least I am proposing to adjust our revenues downward post-COVID-19. So motor vehicle excise tax, we've always exceeded the number by 45, 70 grand, give or take. The depreciation for our new vehicle is rapid once you purchase it. So we decreased our estimate, our outlook for 21 down by 100,000. We were carrying 2.9. We're back to level funding that to 20 levels, which would be a $100,000 reduction in what we were estimating. In terms of fees, we have a reduction in that line item, and most of that comes from the marijuana reduction of 260. And I know there's been a lot of controversy or discussion about how that number is made up. And I'll just remind everybody that 3% is the tax, which is in perpetuity, and then 3% is the community impact fee that the town gets. So the number we were carrying that we revised once, revising it again to 260 from the number we had previous. And then we have another $10,000 reduction in fees through the police department. So the police do details with private vendors, National Grid, even the town of Grafton. When they process all those details, there's an administrative charge that they've been exceeding for a long time. So we increased that revenue and we created this budget for 21. We've now level funded that, which was a $10,000 increase. We're not so sure we collect all that money in fiscal 21. It starts July 1. Building permit fees, we're gangbusters still in the building department, even given this, and we're trying to find innovative ways to do inspections through FaceTime and what have you, but that's an operational thing, which I won't get into. But we do have a reduction from our estimate from 21 initial proposal, down by 46,400. And then state aid is the next biggest piece. And what I would propose for us to coalesce around, because we have to kind of get agreement on the baseline for 21 before we make decisions about 22 or 23. So when I pulled the meeting together with the chairs of the committees, we kind of went through these rough concept ideas, and state aid being level funded, it was about a $201,000 reduction from what we were carrying for 21. I can go through what I think the logic is in reducing these particular items if people want to know why I'm thinking a reduction in motor vehicle excise tax. As a municipal finance guy, we love when GMC does 0% APR for 84 months. People buy cars like crazy. But the backdrop of that offsetting is probably the fact that employment levels will drop significantly or already have. So we don't necessarily see that growth will be there inside a motor vehicle. The marijuana piece is a big deal for a lot of folks. I can tell you that I signed MJ Market's notification back to the CCC, which was a critical component for them to start with their provisional license. So I think that's going to move forward, but I just don't know, again, you just don't know how quickly these things will move. So we revise that. Building permits, we want to hedge that down because we are worried that it could turn down. That's a $46,000 number. And again, state aid, they are going to exhaust a lot of money on COVID-19. They already have. And I'm worried that the commitment that the governor's made in his budget won't be able to be met unless they use a rainy day fund or something to that effect. So that is a 126 increase, I think, for Chapter 70, and I think we had 74,000 for general government. There's pieces in there like state-owned land and veterans exemptions and so forth that are, combined into that number. So at the end of the day, what I would recommend that we look at in terms of adjustments for revenue is $617,599 in terms of a reduction. So after we had that discussion, we had further discussions with the superintendent and Matt relative to what makes sense to close that $617,000 gap. So we did some legwork and try to coalesce around an idea. It's not palatable. None of these options are palatable in any way, shape, or form, but they range from 0% increases for all non-union employees for next fiscal, eliminating new hires requested in the budget, pay increases that we're trying to get people competitively paid would be reduced to 0. That's being revised as we talk. I'll get to that in a minute. And then eliminating positions and moving a lot of operational things like the police department had some requests and the fire department had some requests, moving those to actual warrant articles. So I'll cover those in detail. The biggest piece of the $617,599 number is me asking the board of selectmen, if they'll so inclined, to increase bag fees, page and throw bag fees by 25%, taking small roll of bags from $5 to $6.25 and a large roll from $9 to $11.25. None of that is good, but it gives us an added estimated revenue of 25 grand, which brings that $617,599 down to $567,599. So if you're trying to follow along, we're trying to solve for $567,599. So the things we've done to make reductions, and Becca, can you share that PowerPoint with the group at this point?
Hey,
Tim,
Tim?
can I interrupt you just for a second? Tim,
Sure.
can we just have some can we have some discussion real quick about that number and how you guys arrived to it, and make sure that everybody here understands how you got it? Instead of jumping in on how we're going to solve for it, I just want to make sure everybody understands that. And if there's anybody that disagrees with how you got that number and thinks it should be something else, that we talk about it now before we go to the next step.
I had a question.
I'm fine with that.
Can I add to that question?
Yes, go ahead, Donna.
I just was wondering whether or not both the town and the school side looked at savings that might come between now and the end of the fiscal year, and whether or not any of our contracts can go under force majeure, and see whether or not we can recap, and also what are we putting forward to get reimbursed or get some sort of compensation for the COVID crisis.
Jay, I don't, go ahead.
So on the school side, well, we're anticipating obviously being to the good. Right now we're following state guidance. Our biggest, I guess, issue that we're working through right now in partnership with the other area districts that contract with AA Transportation. The state advised we obviously want to keep them in business. If they're not in business, we're in big trouble. But we're working, negotiating, all of our finance directors together with the director from Shrewsbury taking the lead, have been engaged in conversations and negotiations with AA. So we'll be paying less than 100%. My guess is 70 to 80% to cover personnel costs for the length of the closure. That's the biggest one. We obviously have less energy costs. If the closure gets extended, we'll save on athletic costs, transportation, referees, stipends, all that stuff. We have some movement that's negative. For example, we are still paying our preschool staff, but we're not collecting preschool tuition. But we should be to the good at the end of the year.
Colleen, you had a question?
Yeah, so for Tim, with your numbers, you were saying at one point 617, and then with the bag fees, it would reduce to 25,000, and then you said 567. I get 592 when I subtract 25,000, so I just wondered where the other savings was coming from.
Let me unmute this. All right. 567. Oh, is it the other savings? I'm not sure
So
So the savings, so
You're right. It's 25, it's 50,000 in increased revenues from the bag fee increase of 25% will yield 50,000 in increased revenue for fiscal 21, not 25,000.
okay, thank you.
Oh, so is everybody comfortable with the 617, just that which revenues that they've estimated will be reduced, which fees we won't collect? Is everybody comfortable with that number before we move forward? If everybody just wants to give some indication, I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page before we go to the next part of the discussion.
Jed, Peter here. Thank you. I'm okay with the number for the point of discussion. I think it would be really helpful if this group got like just an itemized breakdown of all of those components, just so we have it on something on paper.
Yes, of course, Peter. Good point. We have the revenue sheet that's on my screen that I have two screens in my office. As soon as I open this machine to see me, and then I can't use these two screens. So we can forward that sheet along with the scenarios for the bag adjustment and for the revenue piece of it.
Thank you.
I guess this is Donna. I guess I'm it would be helpful, obviously, to see something, but also what our best worst case scenarios are and whether or not we have partial funding from both the town and the school side for both 20 and 20.
Well, again, 20 is okay. And we'll try to recoup as much as the expense as we can with COVID-19. But generally speaking, the money that's going to come back from COVID-19 is not going to go to offset any operational costs. It'll be incidental to the crisis. I don't think we're going to get any other additional dollars for general operations. So that's my first premise in terms of how this is all going to, we're on our own to find this 617,599. If we can have increased costs as a result of this, then we'll try to find the revenues that'll offset either from MEMA or FEMA or for some other source. So 20, I still think you're okay in your whole. It's looking forward into 5 months from now when we start the fiscal year where those revenues are likely to be. And I don't believe the 617 will be made up in any way, shape, or form. We're gonna have to take efforts to raise revenue or make reductions, which is the next slide or the next piece that Becca will put up if she has access to share a screen. We can put that up now, unless people have other pieces on this particular one.
Dan, Pusher?
Yeah, so with the marijuana fees, I mean, we don't have to have the exact same conversation all over again, but I just wanted to say, so you're reducing it by 260,000, so it'll be 100,000 now. I still feel like that's high for what we should have expected before the COVID-19 situation, but I just wanted to say that, and I'm fine moving forward with this number. Just wanted to, say that for the record.
Hi, Doreen, can I say something? Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Tim, I just have a question about the bag fees. If the board was to vote in favor of raising the bag fees, when would you anticipate that starting?
For July 1, that's, so you would do it and you voted in May or June.
Okay.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Irene.
Tim, I have a question. Several people have commented why we continue to go with a bag system rather than stickers, meaning stickers you buy and stick on your own bags. I know there are other communities that could do that. I'm just curious why we've made the decision to stick with bags. Because they're incredibly unpopular. I don't care. I have no problem with them.
I would jump in here, Irene. I appreciate the question, but I think that's a question for when the select board discusses the bags and not for this Tri-Comm committee meeting.
Okay,
thank
fair
you.
enough.
I'm so sorry. I do have one more question, Ms. Thomas, and to Tim, to Mr. Kushner's comment. When you were talking about cannabis funding and monies, were you saying you're reducing it by 100,000 or reducing your estimate by 260,000? Or better yet, an easier question would be, what are you carrying for revenue for cannabis for FY21?
I like the first question better because I reduced it by 260.
Any other questions? Any questions for Jay?
So can Becca share her screen with everybody?
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah, if you guys want to move on, that seems like it's time to move on.
Laura, I think you have to let her share the screen.
I don't think so. I gave permission in advance. It's coming now. Thank you, though. I prepared for anyone to be able to share.
So initially we had, am I still unmuted? Because now Becca's blocking my view.
You are not muted. We can hear you, Tim.
So we had revenues, we talked about those, we went through that list, so we won't cover that. That's on a slide that Becca has as well. But to make up, if the board, I mean, I'm putting you guys in an odd spot here relative to bag fees, but to make up the shortfall of 567, 599 in anticipation of fiscal 21 revenue, we would make the following 5 proposed cuts to the municipal budget. 384,821 would include a salary freeze for all employees who make under 75,000, over 75,000, I'm sorry. So anybody making under 75 will get a minimum of 2. Anybody over will get 0. So the issue there that we talked through with Jay and Matt was about equity and a federal standard in terms of pay increases, which Matt can elaborate on that because I didn't do the research independently. But it seems like a good round number in terms of, you know, you can get by 1 year if you're making 75 or more without a 2% increase. So we took that from that discussion we had with both Matt and Jay, and we applied it to us. We also looked at positions that we have currently, and the economic development coordinator position would be one that would be reduced. Public safety equipment would be moved to articles. This is both fire and police requests. I know you're gonna want detail on it. I just need to find the sheet. So they have radios that are in their operating budget that they want to replace, $12,000 cost. We'd want to move that to a warrant article. And of course, that would impact free cash, and we'll get into what that means in a second. Fire department, they have a training line that if we increased it for 21, we would level fund it to 183,021. It's only a $2,400 reduction. The fire department equipment account, where they have turnout gear for the guys who go into burning buildings that has a useful life, we would drop that 102 out of their operating budget, and we would fund that through a warrant article, which would be free cash as well. The highway department would be public works. We would reduce 150,000. Another thing the select board will have to struggle with is, you know, we would use our request to use about 100,000 of Chapter 90 funds to offset those reductions. So line painting, guardrails, things we do, general maintenance, Chapter 90 can be used for that. We would eliminate that from the general operating budget, and we'd make application for each one of those items for Chapter 90. And then the tree account, we put an article together 2 years ago, or a year ago. We had a tree because we have a lot of dead trees in town. We have an article. We would reduce that line item. Becca will have to jump in terms of the total, but it's a 150 reduction. So it's 50,000 from their requested amount for fiscal 21 for tree removal. And 100,000 would be just for offsetting their day-to-day activities with Chapter 90 funds, for a total of 150 in terms of that reduction. And in the library, they have, we got to be careful here because there's a formula that goes into how much money they get reimbursed for, but we have that as a reduction of 11,000. So, you know, the 80,000 in non-union salary increases, that 2% we talked about for people under 75,000, that adjustment is 80,421. The reserve fund for finance committee has always been it's been 100, and then we reduced it 1 year and it stayed at 75, and it's been at 75 for quite a while. We would want to reduce that down to 50, so it's another savings of 25. There's small adjustments made to GIS and MIS, which is super tight as it is, but we have some projects we do with AppGeo relative to mapping overlays for utility poles or easements. So we had $2,000 increase in that line. We've reduced that. And that's really it. And that subtotals out to 384,821. And then the whole theory of having the discussions with Jay was about equity amongst salaried people who make over $75,000. If they get 0, the school department can save, if you will, or reduce costs by 42,000. So the total reduced when you add the 42 and the 384, you got 426,821. So the delta is about 140,000 bucks. Actually, it's 131,599 is the difference. If you do the bag fee and do all these other adjustments I just laid out, you need 131,599 to not have further cuts to either the municipal operation or to the school. And what we talked about and what I would propose is, because it's one fiscal year, use stabilization for 131,599 just to shore up what ultimately becomes the school department's budget, but it'll shore it up to the point where they can have 38,092,653. So that's, well, you have to back out their salary reductions for the 42. So if they don't have that expense, it's 38,653 is the total amount the school appropriation would be, and the budget would be balanced. I will tell you that I hate using stabilization or free cash on any one-time expense, but this is obviously a catastrophic event. I will tell you that Pine Street, we've talked about it a long time, took ownership of it in August. We had bids come back. We put a quick note out to the select board that ranged from $0 for the purchase of that land to $2 million. Under our state purchasing arrangement with the state, we get up to 60% of those proceeds, whichever proposal suits our interest, back as cash. So at minimum, we'll get $700,000 back, provided we close before next June 30, which we turn this around in 10 months to get it on the street, and we have bids in hand. So I think we can sell it even before August, which would be a record turnaround. I would propose, once you have that money in, as a revenue that's not realized and not accounted for in the scenario in any way, you put that 131,599 back into stabilization once you close on that parcel. So at least make that piece whole. And then if it's 700,000 was our percentage or our revenue share, you can decide at town meeting where that difference goes to. So current balance inside of the general stabilization account is 3.6 million. So I don't think it's a real bad stretch for the 131 to keep the request that the school department has made in whole. So Jay, you'll have to tell me, I think I got the numbers right. The original one was 38,92,653. Take out your 42,000 from salary reductions, gives you to 38,50,653.
That looks right, Tim.
And again, we had the call last week, not in a way of, dictating how this goes. It was to do some discovery of what our best way forward is relative to the revenue that I anticipate and that we all agreed to 10 minutes ago was probably the right way to go. So that's kind of where our thinking is in terms of offsetting those revenue reductions in fiscal 21. The bigger piece is, the override, which is the second piece of this meeting. Do you make up for that difference with that money and use more earlier than you would have? Or do you do something else that's a combination of all three options? So none of them are good. I don't like any of this, but the board has to make a decision about an override question by the 13th of April, which is next week. They don't meet again. They meet on the 7th, then they meet on the 14th. If we don't make a decision, just so everybody knows the gravity of it, by the 13th, the 14th will be too late. So the 7th is the goal. That's what's on the agenda for. Now it's up to the groups that decided on the 4 million 4 weeks ago. Is that still the right number? And are we all good with that in light of this situation?
I will. Thank you, Tim. I'll open it up to questions for Tim right now. I have to scroll through, so just keep your hand up if you have a question. I'd also like to add that Mark Haddad has joined the meeting as well, just from Finance Committee. I'm not seeing any questions. Am I missing one? Speak up if I didn't see your hand. Apologize. Jen Thomas, sorry, there you go.
I don't have a specific question, but I kind of see things flash in terms of the chat. Are there any questions from the?
Yeah,
From
there's
the-
a question from the audience, so people can, again, people are watching from home. We can't see them, but they can send us chats, questions through chats. I wanted to make sure the people on the committee had first rights to questions, but the one that came in was from Greg Marr. Salary freeze plus cut to economic development coordinator comes out to $70,421. How much is the economic development coordinator and how much is the salary freeze? Question from the audience.
So it's 31,000 for the economic development coordinator. Becca's gonna have to give you the detail on the people who are over 75 that we're trying to get a pay increase. There's nuance to that too, because I have some people that are funded out of different accounts that don't impact the general fund. So that gets a little bit wonky, but Becca can tell you the second part of the answer.
Yeah, sorry, I'm trying to connect to my server here. It's taking a second. If you want to circle back to this, my computer's a little, acting up a little right now, but I can definitely answer the question. I just need to.
Yeah, sure thing. Oh, we have okay, great. All right, we can circle back. Colleen?
So just for stabilization, we want to keep that between 5 and 10% generally, correct?
That is the goal.
So even if we take that 131, we'll still be just above 5%, correct?
I haven't done the math on the percentage.
All right. I did quick math and I got 5.1. I just wanted to double check that, but okay. Thank you.
Anybody else? People who aren't on video, Donna, Eric, Ed, do you have any questions? I can't see your hands. I don't want to miss you. Donna's good, thank you. Ed's good, all right. Thank you.
I'm good.
All right, thanks guys. Good, all right. So next up, we're gonna bring Matthew Often up. And he had some thoughts to present, I think, in addition to the $4 million override. So Matt, I will turn it over to you.
Thanks, Laura. Let's see. Can everybody see my screen? Great.
Yep.
Okay. So what I'm presenting right now was the product of an informal working group that was put together from some finance committee members. This was Irene Houle, myself, Mark Haddad, and Colleen Roy. So finance committee didn't have a chance to meet between Thursday and tonight. There was just no way to get a meeting in, but some of us had some concerns about.
Hey, Matt,
Yes.
it's very difficult to see your slides. Can you zoom that in a little bit?
Yes.
This one's okay, but when you get to the next one, it won't be readable.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Move to a slideshow. Is that better? Let me go to the next one. Is that better?
We're seeing your view with the next slide and the notes sections taking up a lot of real estate.
You are. All right. Let's see.
Matt, I bet if you keep going, we'll be able to see the numbers. You can't see this. You can see the side. There you go. But that, yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah, so we didn't have a chance to meet as a committee But some of us had some concerns about what was on the table, which was, a fairly substantial override. And obviously things have changed considerably between, when the last time we discussed and now. So we just wanted to offer up some analysis and just another option essentially from that small working group so that we could help feed the discussion for the select board tomorrow. So this is offered in the spirit of potentially another option for the select board to look at and some ideas to go along with an override scenario. So we spent a fair amount of time over the weekend pulling the budget into a spreadsheet and working through some of our best ideas around ways that we could produce something that might be more palatable in terms of something to put on the ballot. So that's what this document is. Broadly, we agree with what Tim's recommendations were in terms of reductions. So I have aligned, based on a couple of discussions with Tim, our model, our override scenario based on the numbers that he and I discussed. So we're trying to as closely align, particularly in FY21, we're trying to align with those baseline numbers that Tim just described, so that as we project forward with a fairly conservative projection, that we have good numbers that are reliable and that hopefully people can trust in terms of coming up with an actual number. So meals tax, excise tax, fees, which is primarily the cannabis money, permits and state revenue, those we all agree with Tim will be reduced as we go into FY21. The committee felt that we would see some continued impacts in these numbers into FY22. So as we look forward, the working group is recommending that we project for a more prolonged economic downturn. So this is something that we haven't seen, certainly in my lifetime, in terms of an economic event. And we just don't know when the end of this is going to be. We don't have any models from any other countries in terms of when this actually turns down. We don't know how this is going to roll through. The measures that we need to implement in terms of social distancing and restrictions on gatherings, those are all dictated by the timeline of the virus ultimately. And so we just don't know what that is, and there's considerable uncertainty for that. So the working group felt that in FY22, we should keep our revenue projections for permits, meals, and excise flat. And again, this is us being fairly conservative to try to get to a good number for an override. Also, the state revenue, we think, should remain flat. So again, we don't know how long this is going to go on. Those excise tax for cars, that very well may be something that carries forward from FY21 into FY22. There's going to have to be some consideration of historical salary expectations. So as we are negotiating contracts, we might want to think about contracts that are a little bit shorter. And we might want to challenge those, 2% expectations that we've historically supported for certain positions. So again, this is something that there's no specific recommendation on this other than, there might need to be some belt tightening depending on what happens with those revenues. So we need to be able to respond and set those expectations in conversations. So obviously, any salary conversations and reset of those expectations would be something that would be temporary, and we wouldn't support any thing looking like an austerity measure, but it's something that we do have to consider.
So Matt, one clarifying question.
Sure.
Meals tax, you have a 40,000 reduction. We talked about it today. I just want to make clear that I don't foresee a meals tax reduction. I didn't increase it for 21, but certainly collecting the level. I will just add anecdotally, July 1 comes and we're still under this. We have so many more conversations that I have. If we can't get people to consume at restaurants starting in July. So I'm a little bit more optimistic, but
Fair enough.
Piece that you guys have. But needless to say, I just wanted to make it clear that we're carrying level funded. You have a reduction of 40K.
Thanks, Tim.
Matt,
Yes,
there was a question that asked about whether this was an official Finance Committee presentation, but I'm curious who was on this working group.
this is not an official Finance Committee presentation. This was an informal working group that was formed. This was myself, Mark Haddad, Irene Houle, and Colleen Roy. So this is offered up to Tri-Comm. Finance Committee has not seen this before. Any of the other committees have seen this presentation. So our best thinking is that just in terms of presenting another option for discussion by the select board is to consider reducing the term of an override to 3 years, to consider removing the capital component of the override. So our capital component was $800,000. We're recommending that the select board consider removing that component of the override. But in order to be able to stem the bleeding on the growing capital backlog, that we slide in the cannabis fees money that Tim mentioned, that 3% in perpetuity, that we slide that money in for capital stabilization. It's not going to fix the problem, but it's going to help stem the bleeding a little bit. So that was our thinking on that. We would want for the select board to consider focusing just on the highest priorities, and that would be education and public safety. So our thinking was that we would fund minimum schools request from our March 5th meeting. So I'll go over that in an upcoming slide. But basically that was their bare bones. This is what the schools need in terms of funding to not just go off the rails completely. In this scenario, we would fund positions recommended by the Fire Study Committee and or positions that would be determined by the new fire chief. So we have that fire study that was commissioned. We've put together a fire study committee. They have some recommendations in terms of positions that would need to be hired. We're recommending that we fund those positions spread out between FY 21 and 22. We'd like to see the police cars returned to the operating budget. So those out of necessity were pulled completely out of the budget in FY 21. We'd like to see those returns. We can get by for some period of time, and Tim and I talked about this a little bit today. Again, we're faced with a bunch of bad options, but we can't continue maintaining the police cars forever just with a maintenance budget, because eventually that maintenance budget, you know, those cars just break down because they've got so many engine hours. And obviously the chief would talk your ear off on that. But so we're recommending to move forward with returning those police cars back into the operating budget in FY 22. Something that the select board could consider, and this isn't in our override scenario, but maybe for your discussion tomorrow, is to consider reducing the road stabilization by 500,000 to reduce that from 1.5 million to $1 million. And what that would do essentially is it would reset the levy limit for the stabilization portion of the override, but it would also reduce the tax burden on taxpayers a little bit. So we're asking them to go to the ballot box, increase their taxes to fund critical services in town to keep things from falling off the rails. This is a way that the select board could potentially reduce that burden a little bit. Now, it does reset the levy limit, so you couldn't just if you wanted to, you can't just reset it to 1.5 million at some point in the future. Your option would be to basically start at that $1 million reduced levy limit, and then you could each year increase that by 2.5%, because your levy limit in terms of stabilization accounts for overrides can only be 2.5% above what you had done in the previous year. So that's not in our model, and it's not necessarily recommended, but it's something that could be considered as a part of the recommendations that you guys vote on tomorrow. So in our model, we have non-salary freeze remaining in place for FY22 for those positions above 75K. We have our educational cost increases in line with the school minimum need that was requested on March 5th. So that has us at 4.7 in FY21, 4.33 in FY22, and then 3.8 in FY23. We have the fire department hiring for all positions beginning in FY21, with the fire chief funded in FY21 and additional positions funded in FY22 and 23. And then the return of the police cars coming into the operating budget at a $95,000 cost starting in FY22. In terms of revenue assumptions in this model, we have revenues from state aid being flat, FY21 to 22. We have local receipts from permits, excise, meals, also flat from 21 to 22. The cannabis money being used to address capital needs, so that's not put into the operating budget, and new growth at historical levels. So that's the model that we've put together. And I've got a spreadsheet that outlines this model and the potential numbers that we would arrive at in this model with these revenue and expense side assumptions. So if it's all right, I'll show that in just a minute. Yes, Mr. Prisby.
Yes, there it is. Matt, how did you come to level fund or to have a 0% growth in the meals tax? What assumptions were you making? Were those based on historical numbers or is that just a best guess?
That is a best guess. So the thinking was that we are potentially facing a prolonged economic downturn, and we just don't know, with people, losing jobs at historical rates, what if people aren't going to. We're not confident that people are going to be out beyond the initial, hey, we can go out and have dinner together now. We can go out to the bar. That's great. So there may be a pent-up demand that we'll see immediately. But the working group's best thinking was just that we shouldn't depend on that long term, that in terms of putting together projections for FY22, it would be a better idea for us to not count on a V-shaped recovery, that maybe this looks more like we would have a drop off in terms of those revenues, and that would remain for some time. So that was the thinking on it.
Okay, thanks.
Matt, I think Barry had a question as well that came through the chat. He was asking if this included the fire grant.
This does not include the fire grant. So in terms of the benefits to this approach, we would be reducing the burden on taxpayers by some amount. We think that these numbers are not confirmed with the town administrator. I've had a couple of conversations with Tim, but I would feel more comfortable if we could have another conversation or two to really nail down these numbers. So I don't want to represent that as hard savings, but in any case, we would be reducing considerably the ask to your average taxpayer. We'd be funding our essential services. So the two services that we felt were the highest priority were education and public safety. So that's the schools, the fire department, and the police. We'd be partially addressing our capital needs. Again, there's no great choices. And for somebody who's so passionate about capital, I hate the idea of taking the capital portion of the override off the table. But we feel like by sliding the marijuana revenue in, we're at least helping a little bit in terms of that. And we're taking advantage of this opportunity with new revenue. We could, again, the select board could consider reducing the road stabilization to offset a little bit. So we would have a further reduction and reduced burden on taxpayers in that. So our model didn't actually have reduced road stabilization included, but it's something for them to consider. It would be us demonstrating fiscal constraint. So it's an important thing for us in terms of optics to be able to demonstrate that we're really uncovering every possible thing and really only asking for the money that's absolutely needed. And then we'd be simplifying our message. So we have, in the current proposed $4 million override, we have a broader mix of things that are funded. In this model, we've just really pared that down to just the basics of education and public safety. So we think the messaging on this, we're not sure how much time we're going to have, but just from a political standpoint, this might be a little bit more palatable. So that was the basic thinking around the model. If it's all right, I'll just take 5 minutes and show the spreadsheet that we put together. And so what we did was we pulled the budget from FY21. 90% of this is all picking right from Tim's budget. And we took the assumptions on the revenue side and on the expense side and just carried those forward into FY22 and 23 and then came up with a number. So for the municipal budget, we pulled everything right from the budget.
I'm sorry, are we supposed to be seeing a new slide? I still see an old slide.
Oh, sorry. You are supposed to be seeing a new slide. You see that?
You definitely need to zoom this one in a little bit. There you go.
All right.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. Okay. Is that viewable? All right, great, thank you. Okay, so what we did was we took the budget numbers for the municipal side right from the budget for FY21. So in this tab, we had general government, public safety, public works, health and human services, culture and recreation. So those are right from the budget, the FY21 proposed budget. Early on and before a discussion with Tim, we had some concerns about health insurance. After discussing with Tim, he had a meeting with his consultant and he assuaged our concerns about the health insurance. So we pulled that piece out, but we had removed health insurance from the unclassified line item to get to this municipal budget on the expense side. I had the 384,821 reduction in line with what Tim presented tonight. So that's how we get to the FY21 municipal budget. We have our road stabilization at 1.5, which is what it has been historically. Again, select board could consider reducing this to reduce the amount of the override need. But that's something that you guys can discuss tomorrow. We added 130 for the fire chief. We had police cruisers being added in FY22. We had the health insurance numbers and all the way down to BVT assessment right from the budget. We had the Grafton Public Schools funded at their request levels from 3.5. The aid to public libraries, state assessments and overlay, those were straight from the budget. So that's what we did for that. We had a TBD, but we're fully funding the positions for FY22 and 23 for building out the fire department and those full-time positions. Again, the fire chief will determine ultimately what the need is for those positions, but we used the numbers from our March 5th discussion and the recommendation from the fire study committee. We have 2 police cars that are funded in the operational budget in FY22 and 23 for the police. On the revenue side, we have our typical increases in terms of the 2.5 levy. Our new growth number, we're confident that that's going to come in at 650. And then we are projecting that we have historical levels of new growth numbers at the 450. So that's typically what we put into the budget. We just carry that forward. We have our road stabilization at 1.5. Tim just mentioned the general stabilization. So we'd have the 135.99, assuming the select board agreed with that addition. We have our debt exclusion pulled right from the budget. Our state aid, we had level funded that for FY21 and FY22. Again, this is us being conservative and then returning back to 1% increase in FY23. And then our sewer enterprise and local receipts. So this was right from the budget, our sewer. And then local receipts was our reductions carried through to next year and the following year. So again, this is a very conservative way to look at projecting for the next 3 years. And then we had to fill in order to balance the budget, we had to add in additional revenues, and this is what would be represented in the 2.5 override. So if we add this up, I know you can't see it, but it's 2.376203. So it's about $2.4 million is what the override number becomes in this model.
Matt, can you flip back to the municipal budget tab?
Of course. Let me make it bigger.
All right. So I'm looking at the one reductions, the municipal cuts of non-salary, non-union salary freezes. Is that just for the municipal side? I think that's for the school side too, correct?
That is just for the municipal side on this, in this, for the municipal budget. What I did for the school side is I took the school ask and then I subtracted $42,000. So we took their full ask for the increase for FY21, and then we reduced it by 42,000, which is their number for non-union positions above 75K. Make sense?
Yes.
Cool. Any other questions on this? Go ahead, Barry. Got to take yourself off mute.
Yeah, FY21 starts July, August, September. Culture and recreation includes summer programs. Do we really think we're going to be clean enough to start running summer programs for FY21?
It's a good question. Unknown.
If we don't, do we have a ballpark idea of how much money we lose?
That wasn't something we had in our projection, but it's certainly something that could be considered. Again, this is us with the weekend and a bunch of hours trying to put another option on the table that might be a little bit more palatable for the select board to consider.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So we certainly didn't think of everything. Yes, Doreen.
There, I think I got it. Can you hear me, Matt?
Yes.
Okay. So thank you. First of all, I get where you're going with essential services, but I want to go back to that and just make sure I'm understanding. So you're saying that you're funding what the fire study committee recommended, and I've been looking back through my notes, and I'm just maybe this is a question for Tim, but how does that differ from the TA's recommendation? And then my second part of that is also with the police cars in FY22. Was that part of the operating budget plan from the town administrator, I guess, from for 2022, and why cars over something else? And maybe the answer is yes. I want to clarify.
Sure. So was that to Tim?
Yeah, to Tim,
Yeah.
or you if you know the answer.
Madam Chair, Laura.
Yes,
Can you hear me?
Tim McInerney.
All right, so to Barry's point, if I understood him, I want to kind of go through these systematically. The revenue we would get or not get, we wouldn't have the expenses for recreation if we don't have the program. So while I would lose revenue, I wouldn't have the expense. So for the beach, if it's not open, I'm not selling beach stickers, I don't have lifeguards. So there's probably an offset there that's pretty even. So I think that's one point that, we've considered, but until we can't open, I think the revenue will offset the expenses because there won't be any expenses. So I'm not saying that completely right, but I think you get the gist of it. If I don't have the expense, I don't need the revenue. That's what I'm trying to say. The other piece of it is for 22, certainly police cars are in the operating budget, I think, in our projection. And then for the number, and Matt, I walked out because I was trying to get a Proposition 2.5 premise. So I don't know if you actually talked about the 418 that Ray Mead, when he came to the podium, said you would need, because that's what the study said, and how you would roll that into the budget. But for fiscal 21, we have the chief first and foremost to make an on-the-ground decision about the operations of the fire department. So I don't have any other positions other than the chief's position in fiscal 21.
Yeah, so Tim, I aligned with your commentary on that based on our discussion today. So I had the 130 in for FY21. And then as a placeholder, again, it'll depend on what the fire chief determines are the needs for the department. But I then put in 418 for FY22 and 23.
Okay, all right.
So I tried, what I did was, as you just went through your presentation and based on our discussions over the weekend, I just aligned all of our numbers to yours so that you felt comfortable with them and that there would be as few discrepancies as possible between what you're saying in FY21 and what we were saying in FY21. So I took the police cars out for 21. We might see a little bit of additional maintenance on those cars, but I took them out, but did put them back into the budget in FY22 and 23.
Okay, Dorian, did I answer both? Or did we answer both?
Okay. All right. If it's all right, I'll just stop sharing, and I think we've got some additional discussion to happen. So I suggest we move on to a more general discussion.
Sure, absolutely. We had a couple comments from, looks like Peter has a question.
I did. I'm sorry. I think I might have spoken right when Matt was speaking at the same time, Madam Chair. My apologies. But before we move on to the general discussion from the chat, Tim, can you remind me again, does recreational fees pay in full for the rec department, or does it just subsidize the recreation department?
No, it's not fully self-supported. It is not fully self-supported.
Okay.
There is a percentage, I don't know off the top of my head, but some money comes back to the general fund, but a lot of money offsets their programming cost.
Correct. Right. Understood. Thank you.
Do we have any other questions? I know this is a little unusual. I appreciate the additional information. Did anybody else come up with a additional override plan over the weekend that they want to share with us? No, I didn't. Okay. From the comments from our, Jen, I'm sorry, I keep missing you. Jen?
That's okay. I do want to say I can't, we kind of glossed over it, but in an email, Matt had said this was a subcommittee of the FinCom, in which case it would have had to have been posted. And this meeting was not posted. It was not open to the public. And so I just want to put that on record that I am not comfortable with this volunteer meeting over the weekend.
I'm not sure that's true. If you don't have a quorum of a committee, 4 people from a 9-person body can get together. You guys get together all the time. You know, there's more than one occasion we've had 2 people from the Board of Selectmen get together and talk about an idea. I'm sure that that's happened all the time. So I wouldn't worry about that. Let's worry about the substance of the idea.
I would say if there's an issue, somebody can absolutely report it to the Attorney General. I wouldn't let the government get in the way of different and new ideas. We can certainly pass it along and let the Attorney General take care of it if it's an issue. But sometimes, you know, and this is the way our government kind of stocks sometimes, right? Like we had a meeting on Thursday, we're meeting tonight, you guys have a meeting tomorrow, you have a tight deadline that you have to make this decision tomorrow. I'm open to all creative ideas, and if the FinCom chair has to take a bullet from the Attorney General, then he'll have to do that. But thanks for putting it on the record.
Also, CPC just did this the other day.
Well,
let's not go down the rabbit hole.
I'm not getting into this. If there's an issue, file a complaint. Let's take the good idea though and not care right now where it came from and at least discuss it.
Yeah,
that's my point.
I
Heather?
just want to say one last thing. I feel completely comfortable with the way that group operated. It wasn't something that Finance Committee voted on. There was no charge. It didn't have a name. There was no authorization from Finance Committee for the subgroup to produce any particular content. It was just an informal working group that really wanted to, the spirit of it was to just put another option on the table for the select board to vote on. So, you know, and it wasn't represented as any official output from Finance Committee whatsoever. So I feel very comfortable with what we did, but yeah, so I'll just stop talking about it then. Yes, Heather.
Well, we had a meeting on March 23rd, correct? That was posted, Sue? Yes. So we discussed all the points that were on that slide. I think what we decided is that you guys as a subcommittee were going to actually do the presentation and work out the numbers. So I'm comfortable with what you did. That's really what we had talked about on the 23rd. So just because we don't, you know, you guys dug deep into the figures, but as far as the bullet points that you discussed, that was discussed in our meeting on the 23rd, which was an official meeting.
Right.
So I just want to put it out there. This would add, still with an override, $375 to the average homeowner's tax bill for next year, in addition to what's coming in on the debt exclusion as well.
Okay, any other questions before I read the comments, and then we can redirect this meeting? Okay, so we have two comments from the audience. Tim Rodrigue says, it's interesting that you are still talking about an override. We are expecting a prolonged economic downturn, discussion of another COVID round in the fall, and many people laid off in town. It would seem almost better to be talking about how to keep a level funded town budget at this point and making hard decisions right now, and maybe revisiting the override in the fall. Tim Rodrigue. And then Lisa Rice responded to Tim. I would like the opportunity to vote yes or no for the override. Without the override, more people would be getting laid off. With the budget starting in July, there is a need to plan now. I also want to let the public know that Melissa Maison from school committee joined the meeting at some point, but she is here live. Hi, Melissa.
It was 7:02, I think.
Oh, thanks. I missed you. Thanks, Melissa. So I think from here, you know, I mean, I'm going to step back a little bit on school committee as we're here to answer questions. This meeting was hopefully to help the select board. I know they wanted input from the different committees. I know you have a tough decision to make tomorrow night, and it's great that we're all together to kind of discuss some options on the table. We have that $4 million option. We have the $2.4 million option that was suggested. And we certainly have any other numbers in between that we can come up with collectively. You know we have concerns from the town, obviously on the school side. The schools were going to fall apart before the crisis in the global world, and we still, as I always say, have to keep our doors open and educate. So I will turn it over if people have discussions, if maybe the select board has questions that FinCom has. I have another comment. I'd appreciate the group taking a straw vote now if each person would support putting an override on the ballot. I'm not sure if we're there yet, and I would probably turn that over to Jen, as that's her committee's job to do that. Obviously, I'm in support of an override to help fund our schools. So thank you.
I have a question, Laura. You're muted.
I know, I'm saying Jen.
Okay. I just in general, in the presentation, Matt had mentioned moving forward, now that contracts are being, you know, when contracts come up to be negotiated, I believe he had said that should be considered. And so I just wanted to touch base. I know you can't talk about the teacher's contract, but that is a big nut, and it's being negotiated right now. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to find out from Jay, just in general, how much a 2% is, you know, additional cost per year, and what every percentage point cost. So if what's a 1% increase, what's a 2%? I'm just curious of the numbers.
I don't have that off the top of my head. Dan, do you happen to have that?
Yeah, I think when we were looking at it, the raise 2% would be like around 400,000. So 100,000 would be, 1% would be around 200,000.
So I'm sorry, just to clarify, so in the budget, I know things have changed, but in the original budget that I looked at, it was 1.2% increase for 1.2 million is the amount you need to increase your all of your personnel costs every year. So out of that 1.2 million, are you saying if it's only if 2% is only 400,000, so 800,000 is all steps and lanes? Is that, or am I missing something?
Yeah, yes, yep, the rest of it would be steps and lanes, and the 200,000 cost, or the 400,000 for 2% for teachers. There's additional cost for raises for the other groups. But so the rest of the 1.2 would be the raises and steps and lanes for, you know, all the other steps and lanes plus the raises for other groups.
So does Matt, have your projections included a 2%? Have you kept that funding the same?
He may have disappeared. Maybe he took a walk, so we can circle back to that. I don't know. I could go look, I suppose, but then I'd have to leave.
For Matt's projections, he just decreased our request by 42,000. So the 2% would still be in for teachers and other unions.
Does anybody else have any questions?
Motion to adjourn.
Actually, I have a question. So I do want to follow up on Lisa Rice's question. I mean, we've got a vote that we took back on March 5th to put a $4 million override on the ballot for May. And we had some conversation a couple weeks ago that makes me think we're rethinking that. Nobody actually has brought a motion to reconsider that vote. Are we, or is anybody on the select board bringing a motion to reconsider that vote for tomorrow night? Don't tell me you haven't thought about it. Let's go. Let's have this conversation.
I have not. And one of the reasons this meeting came about is because I reached out to the chair of school committee and the chair of FinCom and asked if they had reconsidered, because I had not gotten any notification that they have reconsidered. Now, clearly we're having a different conversation tonight. So now I feel like FinCom has reconsidered, although it's not officially FinCom. So I'm fine with taking a straw vote and seeing if everybody is still comfortable with the original proposal, because that's what I was planning on going with tomorrow night. So, but that's one of the reasons we're having this meeting, is to check in and see if everybody is still wanting the original $4 million proposal.
I don't think we need a straw vote. We'll be voting tomorrow night.
So you don't want to say?
No.
Okay, so you're
Stay
no.
tuned for tomorrow night.
All right. Doreen, where you at?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm leaning toward the original.
Okay.
But, you know, I've taken a lot of notes tonight, so I may have questions before we vote, but that's where I'm leaning.
Okay.
Motion to adjourn.
Do I hear a second? I don't. Colleen, second?
No, I'm not seconding.
Okay.
We heard from all of the select board members except for Peter. I was just wondering what his thoughts were.
Sorry about that. Yes. At this point in time, I have not chosen to reconsider my original motion back a couple of months ago.
Dan? You're muted.
Sorry. It looks like there's a few more comments in the chat.
Yeah,
if you
I
wanna-
just saw that. I can't really quite figure out if it's questions to us. It looks like they're chatting to each other, but I'm happy to read it aloud. Let's see, let's see. Donna, this is from Greg Marr. I believe that it was said that the tax increase on the average bill was $151 per 1 million. Since the increase in this proposal was far less than 1 million, how did you determine almost 400 per household for fiscal year 21, that is? Donna answered, multiply 151 divided by /million, which translates to 375 for 2.5 million proposed for the override. Greg, this is from Tim Rodrigue. I believe the override proposed is 2.5 million, not 1 million. Greg Marr, Tim, that's over 3 years. The amount for that first year was far less. And Donna said next year's tax bill. And then Tim reminded me, don't forget public input. It is a question for you on the amount. So can we clarify the amount? I think we're still talking about a $4 million override that was discussed in March 5th, and then a citizens-led override that is 2.4 million. Is that correct, or does somebody want to correct me?
I will ask the question on the original 4. Can we just have a reminder of on the original override that we spoke about a month ago? What is the cost to the taxpayer in the first year? How much, again, because the 4 million isn't going to be spent in year 1. Just like last time, we only raise and appropriate the amount we need for that year. So what is that ask? Does anybody?
I have it. I'm trying to pull it up. This is Tim, sorry. So it's 151 per million. We have obviously borrowing the nuance here is in permanent financing for our portion of the library share and the last million for DPW. And whether you do short-term borrowing or long-term will impact the taxpayer. And we're trying to pick the best route that minimizes that impact. So that's a piece of it. You'll have an automatic increase with new growth and under the allowance of 2.5. I'm giving you a way long answer, I apologize, but it's not just, it's either as simple as $151 for every million you levy, or I can take you through all those scenarios I just tried to get through. So, you know, the average single family tax bill, as we were proposing it, I had a sheet that laid that out. I'm hoping Becca will, I can't pull it up on this, on the server right now. It was on the bottom of a sheet I had. I don't have it right here in front of me.
I have it. I pulled it up if I may, real quick. So just really quick, under the initial proposal of 4 million with 3.2 for operations, in the initial proposal, which doesn't include any of the cuts that we've talked about tonight, because this was all discussed pre-coronavirus. So in that initial proposal, we were proposing to raise 1.2 million in the first year to fund the schools at the requested rates, and then to fund the public safety pieces. In that first year, the average single family tax bill would go to 7,518, compared to if you did no override, the average single family tax bill will be at 7,200. So it's about a $300 increase for that 1.2.
Thank you, Becca.
Pete?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So Tim, if we were to look at the increase that we were just proposing through your proposal and Matt's proposal, and I think what we're trying to make up a shortfall of what, a few $100,000 based on the cuts that were proposed.
Yeah, I mean, if we want to hold the school harmless after they're 42, after I make all the reductions we talked about on that expense slide, you need 131,599.
Okay, so between that number and the proposed number from the working group from Finance Committee, what would the average tax bill be then if we had to go beyond our 2.5 capacity? So if it's 151 for every, was it 1.5 million or 1 million? What was the number again? If someone wants to just back of the napkin math, figure that out.
For every 1 million, it's 151.
Okay.
Those are, first of all, there's a couple pieces of that. It's average. Everybody's not average, obviously. So, and it's based on value. Some will pay more, some will pay less. So I just want to qualify that.
Yeah, let's just assume, just for the sake of discussion, let's just use the average just to make it simple, right? So if we needed $350,000 next year, how much would that average tax bill be above and beyond the 2.5 over Primer?
$60.
Thank you.
It's very quick math, but I'm going to go with 60.
I'm always impressed with the quick math that's done at these meetings. I had another clarification question from Greg Marr. He said he thought, what I thought I heard Donna was say was that the 2.4 million proposal would still result in a 375 average increase next year, plus debt exclusion. Donna, I don't know if you can clarify, or
Yep, that's right.
Matt can. Okay, Donna and Matt are on the same page. Okay. Any other questions, comments? You know, obviously you guys have lots to talk about tomorrow night. We appreciate you getting on the call with us tonight. School committee also meets tomorrow. And I think FinCom meets Wednesday. So appreciate all your hard work and getting together and everything that's going on that everybody's doing for the town right now. Jen.
Oh, I'm sorry. It sounded like you were signing off and I just still had a question. Okay. Oh, sorry. Just didn't mean to interrupt you.
Just babbling. Go ahead.
I wanted to just quickly check in with the school committee members and see which of these proposals they would like and what, if they are still on board for an override in the spring, or if the timing is changed in their opinion, or I would just like to, I haven't heard any of the school committee members speak about it, and I would just like to hear what they have to say.
Jen, it's Melissa. Hi. Can you hear me? Yeah. I'm still inclined to vote for it. I think that the benefits outweigh the negatives.
Do you prefer either of the proposals?
I have to think about it a little bit harder, Jen.
Okay.
So I know we still need to have an override. I'm just sure we need to maybe revisit and see what the numbers need to look like or the best timing for this. Because generally we just want the best timing to optimize when it would pass, if it can pass. And I know that I would like to talk more tomorrow at our meeting about what the effects may be. I know we won't know right now, but if there's going to be an effect with, you know, everything that's going on, there might be some repercussions with special ed, making sure everyone has to get caught up, and I'm not really sure. I think there's just more to discuss and more to think about. So that's what I'm thinking.
Heather.
So I would just say, you know, I think certainly an override still has to be on the table. It is urgent. It absolutely has to happen. And I appreciate Matt's and the subgroup's efforts around prioritizing school and public safety. I think if this has taught us nothing, it is how valuable those people are to our world. And the only thing I would say is, does making it a shorter term and a smaller number create more issues down the road? So I think that's just something to consider. Is it setting us up for, another very difficult town conversation in a couple of years, rather than, trying to get people to understand the shortfall that we are facing right now?
Amy? You're muted.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with my colleagues. We're certainly not going to need less money moving forward. We're already at the bare minimum here. We're not asking for an override to add people. We're asking for an override to keep what we have from falling apart. And my stance on it has not changed at all.
And just to add my, I want, as Tim knows, I want to get to yes. My number one concern as a school committee member is the schools. Obviously, I love the town of Grafton in many other ways, but I'm here to advocate for the schools always. So whatever it takes to get to yes, and what is palatable to help our schools works for me. So I saw some Colleen's hand and then Barry's hand.
So I was just going to comment on, we're going to be in a difficult position in a couple of years, no matter what, whether it's the 5-year override or the 3-year override. So I think getting something passed should be the most important thing that gets focused on. And considering that everything going on, a $2 million ask seems more palatable than a $4 million ask, considering that this is just needs. We need this.
Laura Often, Tim McInerney. Oh, Barry, I'm sorry, I jumped in on you. I apologize.
I'm looking at the last question in the chat box, and as a management exercise, I would think it would be very important to have a backup plan in case the override does not succeed.
Yep, I think the schools have been pretty clear about what our loss will be on our end. That hasn't changed. I don't know, the town, I think, has talked about it as well. But
Yep.
just for the record, can I read aloud what the question was, and then we'll get to you, Tim?
Sure.
This was from Chantel Kimball. It would seem pretty critical to have a clear picture of what happens if the predicted shortfall intersects with a failure of an override. Okay, Tim.
All right, just, this group's been here for a while, 2014. I just think there needs to be some credit given to the group relative to the 6 years you've squeezed out of a 5-year override. I mean, there was certainly, some shortage in terms of the goal to be met for the school department funding at 5.25%. 1 year we were a little bit shy of that. We all got through it fine, but you were good stewards of the community's money. And whether you commit to 2.3 and commit to a spending strategy to get you to have this conversation in 2 years from now, or 4, it doesn't matter, because those numbers are going to be the same as long as you commit to the growth pattern like we did in 2014. So I'm stating the obvious, I understand that, but there's got to be credit given to this group, because we were disciplined. We went to town meeting with the requisite percentages that we were trying to grow budgets by, and you stuck to it. And I think people have to take note of that and recognize it. And that's what stewardship is about. And you've met that goal.
Thank you, Tim, and thank you to your work, and Becca and Jay and Dan as well.
I'm sorry, I have another question. Just on Amy's comment, you said that there are no additional staffs. This is just to keep level service. I thought your plan included additional staff every year.
It has one additional position every year, correct?
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions, concerns, dumb jokes?
I think Sue has one.
Yep, I have a question.
Hi, Sue.
Hey,
I would just like the select board to really seriously consider both models. We need an override, obviously. There's a lot of work put in by Matt in this subgroup. We can argue the legality of it some other time, or you can report it. But I really think you should compare both models and make some serious considerations of both and decide maybe we should come up with a third model out of these two and come to some kind of a compromise or agreement. There really is a lot to consider and a lot that needs to be done. And just to say, you know, I don't want to tell you what I want to vote on tonight until tomorrow, I think is just not the way we as professionals should be conducting ourselves at this meeting. So I would just like to say, consider both models seriously, and let's come to some kind of reasonable discussion and decision on the override. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. Anybody else have something they want to say? I want to make sure everybody gets to be heard. Dan Gale joining in via video. Hello.
Does Dan have a quarantine beard going?
Beard's looking good.
He
Nice
does.
job, Dan. Nice job.
He
I'm
does.
taking a shaving for tomorrow. The same.
All right. All right. Does anybody
Laura?
have anything not beard related to say?
Laura?
Dan?
Dan
Yep.
Kusher. So I guess I'm a little confused about what happened at the last select board meeting and why an override wasn't voted on then. If it sounds like Jen is saying that nobody was considering changing the plan. So I'm confused about what happened at that meeting and why we're here now.
Well, at that meeting, we had a discussion about it, and it didn't have to happen at that meeting because the deadline is April 13th. So nobody at that point said, just because of everything, there's so many uncertainties, we're waiting to gather more information. That was my reason for not voting for it at that point. I wanted a little time. I wanted to check in to make sure everybody's on the right page, on the same page as before. So it was just to make sure our due diligence was done. That was it.
Could you elaborate more about what you mean by due diligence? The idea that you were unsure and wanted to do something, but now you're surprised that anybody was considering a different amount. Like, what exactly do you mean by due diligence? Like, what was the reason for a delay?
There were conversations going on between town staff and the superintendent and about maybe other ways to, again, listen, I committed to putting something on the ballot if that's what everybody feels like it is, but I am not 100% comfortable asking people to support an override at this point in time. So the last time we all met together, we had an October date and we had a different proposal, and it was, you know, things happened in the meeting and a different proposal came out, and that's fine. I committed to putting something on the ballot, but there were questions about, there was information that maybe we didn't have to do one if we could make up a deficit for the school committee, because again, fiscal year 21 is not great, but it's not as bad as fiscal year 22 and 23 in terms of the school projections. So there was some talk about whether or not it was something, if we thought, again, the goal is to get it passed. I'm not really comfortable that it's going to get passed given the environment we're in. So I just wanted to gather information, talk to people, make sure this is what we want to do, is ask taxpayers during this time whether or not they're willing to pay more money. That's that's it. And again, we can make the vote tomorrow night, or we can have another special meeting if we don't come to a conclusion tomorrow night. But I feel like we have enough information to do that.
So I guess,
Doreen wanted to talk.
can I respond to that real quick?
Yes, and then I think we need to move on from this, but go ahead.
Okay, so regarding deciding whether or not the community wants to do an override, I feel like that's the point of putting it on the ballot, to find out if the community wants to do it and let the community actually have a chance to answer that question. And I also, the idea that it was under consideration to not do an override this year is total news to me. So I wish that was kind of mentioned at the beginning of this meeting, that was where people were leaning.
It's not that we were leaning that way. It's we were exploring all of the options before we put it on, because it is a very difficult time right now for people. And it's all about balance. And it's not anything, it was just conversations that, again, I find it so interesting that, never mind, I'm not gonna go there, but we are convening to come to an agreement about whether or not to do it. I didn't say that I wouldn't put it on the ballot. I have been clear about that. If everybody feels strongly that we need an override, I will put it on the ballot to let people vote. I have said that time and time and again.
But
So
you
the
just
last
said
time that we
you
met
were-
as a Tri-Comm, last time we met as a Tri-Comm meeting, it went from 3.2 to 4 million. There was no public input. There was no public information. At that time, if we'd gone forward with the 4.0 million, it would have been a $600 increase to people's tax bills. And given the COVID crisis, and this was even before this has escalated to the point where thousands of people are dying and hundreds of thousands of people are getting affected. It wasn't the right time or the right amount or the right information out to the public that I was concerned about at our last vote.
Doreen, you had your hand up, and then Ed.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I'm just want to speak for myself personally of why I held off on the vote a few weeks ago. Same as Jen, it wasn't not putting this on the ballot. For me, I needed to, what I meant by gathering more information was, obviously this is the first time we've all been in a global pandemic. So making this decision without hearing directly from school committee, FinCom, conversation with the town administrator, what I didn't want to do, and not knowing when our town meeting's going to be, whether or not, when that override date is going to be, I felt like there was a lot of unanswered questions there that I needed to take a step back and have a conversation like this. And so I appreciate everybody getting together tonight, answering questions, giving more details that the board can talk about and discuss and come up with, in my opinion, a strategy to have an override on a ballot that's going to pass in the community. And that's the goal, right? That's the goal. And so I didn't want to answer that question without more information, without a few more weeks going by. We have daily updates from our governor, from the state, and I was just at a point where I needed to take a step back. So it wasn't a matter of taking an override off a ballot or deciding not to use certain language. It was really just that this is a first for everybody, and I felt like the more input, the better. So I personally appreciate this meeting tonight. It's helped me a lot.
I think Ed had his hand up, Colleen, and then Colleen.
Thanks. Just a couple things to set the record straight a little bit. There was no proposal that went from one thing to another a month ago. There were a couple people that got together and came with an idea of $2 million override to happen in October. And then the rest of the group got together, we hashed out the idea at length, and then we voted. And to date, there is no other vote to reconsider. So what we have on the table right now is not only a $4 million override, but one that's a vote that's supposed to happen in a month. And in the past 3-4 weeks, there's nothing that's happened that's changed that. All right. So the next thing that needs to happen going from here is the select board needs to meet tomorrow night. And if there is going to be a different proposal on the table, someone needs to bring a motion to reconsider. That motion needs to be seconded. And then we need to come up with a new plan, including a new date, because I doubt any of us are going to want to encourage people to gather en masse to go vote on May 19th. So we're gonna have, that's a whole other discussion. That's gonna happen later. But, I do wanna say, I thank everybody for coming to this meeting. And I do thank Matt and his group from FinCom for coming up with an alternative proposal, because there is a reality out there that this is gonna be a lot of money for a lot of people. Families have been affected, and I understand that. But nobody here also, for the, I think, 20 attendees who are not part of this group, we haven't articulated to them why we're still even thinking about it. And that's because for the past 5 years, this has been coming. We should have been planning about this the whole time, talking to people about this the whole time, and reminding people that in FY21, this was going to happen. We didn't do that. We told them things were fine. So they're surprised. They're probably even more surprised to know that in the middle of a pandemic, we're thinking about a tax increase above and beyond 2.5%. And to those people listening right now, I will remind you that around the economy, you are seeing the effects of what is happening on private business, just missing 2 weeks of ordinary business. That's what happens when your expenses keep going and your income flatlines. We have kind of the same thing here. State aid has decreased, health insurance costs increase, and our income is basically the same, but less every year. 2.5% doesn't come near enough to cover our expenses. And why is this important to you? Well, it could be important to you because you care about schools and police and fire. Or it could be important to you because you want to maintain the equity in your home. What happens when your stock portfolio goes away and all you got left is a paper wealth in your house? You don't want that to go away either. So there are some very good reasons to consider being disciplined and sticking with the plan that we have. There's also some very good reasons to consider going with something a little bit shorter, so long as for the next 2 years, we're talking about this. And we make it very clear to people that this time around, we didn't fix anything. And I haven't decided yet which way I'm gonna go on this. And if anybody wants to move me off my rock, we still have a $4 million override proposal on the books. Feel free to email me, feel free to call me. But thank you. That's it.
Thanks, Ed. All right, Colleen, and we have a couple of questions in the chat that are directly to the select board. I would propose, just as if somebody was sending me questions about the school committee, I would not address them tonight. Those are questions for the select board and they can address them tomorrow night. We have questions about the super park. We have questions about what meetings. I really don't want to get into that tonight with the Tri-Comm. I appreciate people reaching out, but those are select board questions. Just as if somebody had questions about remote learning today, I wouldn't accept it here. So I'm not trying to ignore you, and I appreciate your comments, but I think those are better directed to the select board tomorrow night. Colleen?
I just wanted to address the comment about the lack of public input at our last Tri-Comm. That room was packed, and we did hear quite a bit of public input that night in regards to that $4 million number.
And I also would say that we've been waiting to move on to educate the public and ask questions. We've been waiting for a date. I know there's an advocacy group formed and they've been waiting for a date and a number. But at this stage in the game, do we have any other new information, somebody that hasn't said something that's already been said? There was a thank you for the input from Tim Rodriguez, saying tough decisions ahead, and Peter Carlson said, thanks for your input, stay healthy and safe. I think we all believe that. So thanks everybody who joined. Do we have any other new thoughts, new comments that are helpful to the select board that would help them make their decision tomorrow night? We had a motion to adjourn, but I'm going to ask for a new motion. I don't know if that's rules, but I'm going to do it.
So
Motion to adjourn.
Second. All right. somebody who knows this better than me, do we have to individually adjourn each meeting? Like each group?
Just start with school committee, we go select board and FinCom and do
All
roll
right,
call.
so can I have a motion from school committee?
I make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Second.
All right, motion made and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor, you can raise your hand. Oh, we have to take a roll call vote?
You have to do roll call.
I
yes.
know, I know. All right, Jen Conley,
Jen Connolly, yes.
Amy Moore,
Amy Mar, yes.
Melissa Maison,
You lost.
Melissa Maison, yes.
yes. Heather Riley,
Heather Riley, yes.
Laura Often, yes.
Okay, can I have a motion for the select board?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
I have a motion to adjourn. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor by roll call?
Carlson, aye.
Stock eye.
DeFazio, aye.
Frisbee, aye.
Can I get a motion from FinCom?
I move that we adjourn.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Any discussion? Often aye.
Robbins, aye.
Roy, I.
Barry
Fisher,
Smith,
aye.
aye.
Eric Swenson, aye.
McHugh, aye.
Motion's carried.
All right, thank you so much, everybody. Please stay safe and take care of yourselves and your family.